honor for me to present Jonathan Schussler to you. You should know that he is graduating this semester onwards to better things. You should know that he is a 4.0 student. You should know that he is one of the very best students that I've encountered in my teaching career, both in America and in the UK. He is not an archaeologist, so don't give him a hard time. He is an economics/business major, but as the president of our Honor Society on campus this year, or in the last year, the students wanted to do, or needed to do, an Honors in Action project. That is a project that involves significant research and has some kind of community impact. The build-up to this, which Jonathan will tell you, is that the Department of Mental Health and Hygiene asked the college to do a survey, a magnetometry survey, of the cemetery at Crownsville Hospital, which was formerly known as the Maryland Hospital for the Negro Insane. They needed to know the parameters of the cemetery, the extent of the cemetery, and to see about the relevance of current headstones to internments. We involved, Larry Seastrom is my assistant, who's in the audience here. Larry and I involved some students in the survey, including some of our honor students, and Jonathan, under Jonathan's leadership as president of the chapter, the students took this data on and then sort of elaborated it and built out of it into a project that actually was featured on Mirror in the Morning with Sheila Cast last month. They've really done some amazing research into the history and the social memory, or to re-establish the social memory of this very important site to the African American community and frankly to the whole community. From the perspective of public archaeology and building on our speakers from this morning, I think it's really important to note that as keen archaeologists ourselves, the significance of what we take from the archaeological record, we feel a great urgency and need to have this, at least in part, also shared by the community around us. Everyone benefits, right, when non-archaeologists have a sense of this value. And Jonathan has been able to inspire faculty and students at our college in active research into this site, and is a prime example, I feel, of being able to engage the public who are non-archaeologists to then engage one another as well. The success of our discipline, of our passion, relies in engaging more people beyond our immediate sphere as to the value of this stuff. And Jonathan's project is a prime example of that. So, without any further ado, Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you all so much for having me today. It's an honor to be here to speak to you all. So I'm going to talk to you guys about the Crownsville State Hospital today. This is the topic that we chose to focus on for our Honors in Action project, as Dr. Cripps said. So a quick couple of facts to kind of get us started, get you guys familiarized with the hospital and so on. It's opened in 1911. It's unique, we believe, to all mental institutions in the entire country, and that it was actually built by the residents who then lived there. Spring Grove Hospital, which is in Catonsville, Maryland, sent about 150 unpaid patients into an undeveloped plot of land set aside by the Maryland state government, and they built over the course of about a year and a half the grounds and the facilities at Crownsville. So this is a very unusual beginning to a very unusual history throughout the entire time that Crownsville is in operation. The facilities are designed for approximately 1,500 patients. We see the many patients it actually holds fluctuate quite a bit over the time, but that's what it's intended for. This is a shot of the main administration building as it's stood in about the 1920s. As you can see, it has that very imposing institutional kind of feel. More and more throughout Crownsville's history, it becomes less a facility of rehabilitation and treatment, and much more the feel of kind of a institutional, kind of prison-like, if you will. So the facility itself is made up of 60 different buildings. Many of these were built throughout the approximately 90 years that it was in operation. It's on 477 acres of land that was set aside by the government when in 1910 they decided there was a need for a mental institution, specifically for Black mental patients. Before this time, they were housed in segregated wards at white mental institutions. And in fact, we have record of white mental institutions paying for other institutions to take the Black patients out of their institutions just to get them away, was the kind of mentality at this point, which is hard for us, I think, to reconcile today, but very much a large large part of why Crownsville came about. Just to give some context of exactly where we are talking about, Crownsville Hospital there in the center lies just to the east of 97, Severn River over there. So the charter calls for a facility for the, quote, detention and care of the Maryland Negro insane. So we start off with kind of a noble goal, if you will, a place that's supposed to be equal to the facilities available to white patients at this time. But what we see is that Crownsville quickly deviates from this noble ideals that it's founded on, noble ideals that today seem very archaic. And the real problem at Crownsville is in the fact that they had such a large task to undertake, and yet they were not supported by the community, by the government, and even by the people who worked there. A significant example is the fact that there were mixed wards at Crownsville. There's no separation by the age group that you were as the patient there. There's no separation by what illness you had. In the 1914 Maryland Lunacy Commission report, we see a call for separation of wards because they had an outbreak of tuberculosis and it's infecting all the other patients because there is no separation. The next picture I'm going to show you also speaks to why this was a problem. In with all of these children, we have certainly violent patients. This is the superintendent of Crownsville for approximately 30 years between its opening and 1950-ish. His name is Robert Lynchwood. He is showing a Baltimore Sun reporter his collection of shivs that they have confiscated from patients at Crownsville. So there is a significant problem with this. There are records of deaths at Crownsville because of patients attacking others. Certainly there were violent outbursts. Certainly an issue that was pervasive throughout the time Crownsville was in operation. And another huge issue was, like I said, the fact that Crownsville was not supported by the government and by the community as it should have been, and it led to conditions like this. It led to severe overcrowding. In 1947, the Baltimore Sun reports that in a facility designed for 1,500, there are over 1,800. So this results in a lot of what you're seeing in this kind of photo. 2 people to a bed. We have record of people sleeping on the floor, people suffering from epilepsy without beds. It really is it's sad to see because these people, they're there for treatment, but they're not getting it, or at least they're not getting it the way they thought they were. So this led us to the question, who is Crownsville actually for? We see that the charter calls for it to be for the detention and care of the, quote, Negro insane, but what role did it actually serve in the community, and what role did it actually play in these people's lives? This was the question that we were trying to answer with our research, and we were not the only ones asking this question. In August 2013, the Maryland ACLU and the Black Caucus sent a letter to then Governor Martin O'Malley asking him to allocate the resources and kind of the initiative to ask and lead an inquiry into what went on at Crownsville throughout its reign. To say, we don't know a lot about what happened at this place. We don't know a lot about the people who were there, and we should know more. And so after this, we see this letter, and we decide as a chapter to take on this project, to try to make an effort to investigate into these people's lives and shed more light on what exactly went on at Crownsville. And so our chapter, through here, Dr. Cook's in front, started looking into this, started using primary sources to try to shed some light or elucidate exactly what went on at Crownsville during this time. We were very fortunate to receive a grant from Ancestry.com, which immensely helped us in accessing these primary sources and pouring through a huge amount of data very efficiently. Our primary research instrument was the 1940 census. We used the 1940 census because it was the most recent available. Censuses only become publicly available until 70 years after they are conducted. So this is the newest we have right now. And the way we used this was basically to give us a snapshot of Crownsville in 1940. We looked at all the census forms at Crownsville Hospital in 1940, and from that we get a bunch of information. We get patient names, their ages, their race, where they were born, where they were 10 years ago. And that's not really all we're interested in. We're not just interested in making a list of who was at Crownsville in 1940. That's not the point of our research. The point was to say, using these pieces of information as a jumping off point, can we then go backwards and forwards in time and try to trace the stories of these people. What led them to Crownsville? Where did they go after Crownsville? Did they go anywhere after Crownsville? So the findings from the data side are these. So in 1940, this is the age distribution at Crownsville Hospital. So it's really, really interesting and really striking, the age distribution, how even it is. We do not see what I think most of us would expect. The population under 18, and this is not 17, 16 years old. These are a lot of 4, 5, 6-year-olds. A lot of people that me and my chapter members, I think everyone else, were very surprised to see in with all these other individuals. Like you don't expect to see so many young children in a place like Crownsville, especially in this way. So I was really struck by how even the age distribution is. And then the population that Crownsville served, or at least housed. We see it's from all over the country, a couple international. While the majority are from Maryland, we see also a large contingent from the South. And we have kind of tentatively linked this to the Great Migration, kind of the northward push of these individuals who end up displaced in Maryland and turn to Crownsville as a place of last refuge. And then finally, the gender demographics at Crownsville in 1940, very, very strikingly male-dominated. This was also a surprise to me. I was expecting to be much more balanced, but indeed, significantly higher male population. A couple shots of Crownsville. These are very hard to find because the Maryland State Archive still restricts the records, the pictures, basically any information about Crownsville while it's in operation. So these pictures are hard to find and few and far between. This is a shot of the data room at Crownsville. It strikes me because we see how it really is just an open, empty room. There's nothing in it. This is where patients were put throughout the entire day. And all the primary sources that I've read, Capital Gazette at the time in Annapolis, reported that when you go in there, it's just people milling about. There's no order, there's nothing happening. It truly felt like just a holding place for these people. I think the very stereotypical mental institution kind of hallway we all expect to see, the white on white with the small locked rooms. And then finally this one, which also struck me because I think it really speaks to Crownsville as a kind of a prison kind of feel. It doesn't feel like a place of healthcare or treatment or rehabilitation. It feels like a prison. So there's a whole nother facet of this whole project that I haven't even touched on yet, and that's the associated cemetery. The cemetery lies just to the west of the hospital. It's split in half by 97 at this point. At the time, it was not. So it was used for the internment of patients who had nowhere else to turn. It's used by those patients without close family or without the means to be buried in the traditional way. And so what we see is that most of the people who are buried here are forgotten. There are no records about them. What records there are missing. So this is really exacerbated by the way the graves are marked at Crownsville. A shot of the cemetery, you can see a couple of the markers there in the bottom. If we zoom in on a marker, it looks like this. It's a concrete block, typically has 3 digits stamped into it. At the time, these 3 digits corresponded to a ledger, which would have said who is buried beneath this. But that ledger is long gone. And so now what we have are like 4,000 grave markers with no idea of who's beneath them, and no sure way of finding out who is there. So our project really tried to say, okay, we cannot say who number 811 is, but we can say who is probably buried at Crownsville and what is their story. How can we ascribe some meaning to their life all these years later? So a couple of the outcomes of our project. We quickly realized that it's not about the data here. It's not about making a big database or a big list of who was at Crownsville at a certain time. It's really about the individual stories and the importance of recognizing these individuals, even though for so many years they have been forgotten. I'm going to share with you one of these stories. This guy's name is Walter Adams. He's born in 1888 on Cathedral Street in Baltimore. He has one sister at this time named Mary. His father is a stevedore, a dock worker in the Baltimore Harbor. Fast forward a couple years, we see Walter registering for the draft. We quickly lose track of him after this, it's my suspicion that he most likely served in World War I. The next time we hear of him again is on the census. We see him at Crownsville Hospital. Kind of inexplicably, after World War I, he appears at Crownsville. And he is there for the next at least 20 years. The research process for these individuals is complicated and rocky and in no way predictable. It's very hard to get on someone and find these several pieces of information, and then you want to find the death record. You want to close their life, if you will, and you can't. So that's where it stands with Walter Adams. We see him for the last time on the 1940 census. As you can see on the second column there, he is classified as an inmate. All people at Crownsville were classified on the census as inmates during this time. We lose track of him after 1940, and I have not been able to find him again. There's no death records in the usual places for him. And the conclusion that my advisors and I have kind of come to is that the lack of a death record is fairly compelling evidence for burial at the Associated Crownsville Cemetery. So there's no definitive answers here, but there are these kind of ideas of what may have happened and where this person may have ended up. And that's really the goal of this project, is to say, we can never say definitively where your life ended, what led you here, what it was like while you were here. But we can try to track your progression, your history, your steps through time, and try to give some meaning to that so many years later. And that's really the importance of this project, is just to recognize these many thousands of individuals who passed through the doors at Crownsville over all these years, and to try to, almost 100 years later, give recognition and give acknowledgement to them. Does anyone have any questions? Go for it.
You said that the awards were mixed.
Yes,
Was it men and women together?
it was.
I have one other question. You said that the records at the hospital the photos are restricted.
Yes.
What justification do they use for not allowing you to view those photos?
The same justification that I think anyone uses when you're dealing with things that pertain to anything medical. In case you're talking about confidentiality all these years later, they still feel that showing who these individuals are is in some way a violation of their privacy.
It's a partial restriction, so if you can convey a reason, a valid reason of research, then state archives are able to permit you access. And they have been very willing to grant additional access. One of the issues with researching in community college is our good populations tend to move on in a timely manner. But as Jonathan says, there's a heavy restriction necessarily, and the point of this project quickly became we didn't want to highlight necessarily identifying who was there for mental health reasons and who wasn't. Many of these children may well have been conceived and born in the hospital, but to quickly identify that the hospital is serving a multiplicity of patients for all different reasons. Maybe they were part of the Great Migration, maybe they had PTSD, maybe they had, for whatever reason they ended up there. But as Jonathan said on the radio, we want to replace a lack of memory of death with a memory of the value of these people in life and their service to the communities that they were a part of. But HIPAA is, what restricts just general access to all of these people.
I think that the state law is birth records are closed until 75 years later, and death records are open like 25 years after the death or something like that in general. But I live in Crownsville. My great-grandmother bought out there in 1919, and where off of 97 is there a graveyard? That's certainly not marked.
Dr. Griffin, I'll turn this one to you. You are more familiar with the site.
Yeah, it is on, 97 divides the site, the actual plot, and it is behind a gated, locked area necessarily because it is a site of strong significance and memory to the African American community, and it is not publicly accessible. Having said that, the Department of Mental Health and Hygiene do work with a couple of communities, a couple of churches, African American churches in the area, and they do go and help maintain the site, clear it of, deweed it, keep it clear. But there has been an issue with people effectively trespassing.
State Hospital for 30 years, and he ran this big boiler that provided heat for the whole place now. And I knew a lot of nurses and people in the community who worked there. You know, it's not, well, I'd never heard of the graveyard.
Because I think because, so the period that we're talking about obviously is not the period after 1967, 68 desegregation. The site was a very different site after that time. I think it's important to state, right? You know, people were working in a much different manner. The whole, outlook was very different. Jonathan's group have really been focusing on this early time period that, is really important to remember. But yeah, the cemetery was in use until, it wasn't in use until obviously the site closed down. I think the last interments may have been in the late 70s. And as a result, you really wouldn't know it's there. John?
I was just saying that when you go out to the cemetery and you'll see the headstones or the markers, we counted over 400 markers with nothing but 3 and 4 digit numbers on them. There were 27 or 28 markers that have names on them. And the last one I remember seeing was dated in the 1950s. So that was one of the problems, that aside from those 27, 28 names, all of the other 400 names, they're unidentified. And that's the other problem with the cemetery. Look at the ACLU there, and it will mention, and now I'm going back in time.
Anything from
Like, for
1500
example,
to
1,500, they will claim that there were 1,500 people buried there. We counted 400 markers. Other documents, claim, 600 people being buried there, or up to 5,000 people being buried there. So the problem is that the records, are scattered from here to there, and that's the prime issue with the cemetery, is that nobody knows who's buried there, nobody knows how many people are buried there, and it's just a memento to, a lost community of people.
And the survey data is actually the property of the Department of Mental Health and Hygiene, but the survey was able to clarify the extent of burials across a much wider area than the headstones represent, and allude to the fact that we're probably talking in the thousands, or at least over a thousand. And then the other point is that today this site is heavily patrolled by security because it's a popular ghost hunter site. We'll talk about this. I don't think that it's a ghost hunter site because it looks like a set of ruins, right? It's got an eerie feel today. It's not specifically because of the history, although for some it may be because it was an asylum, but the actual public understanding and awareness of what the site truly represents arguably has not been out until you've done your research. It's really not been out in, the data. They crunched 3,000 names from